Hello everyone, this is Talal Hussain and today I'll be talking about 5 predictions for SAT October 2024. And I know that all of you must be preparing for it. All of you must be practicing for it. You have your SATs this week. Obviously, you guys are, looking forward for that 1500 plus. You're looking forward for that, dream college. You want, you have all of these things in front of you. But obviously before getting into a college, it's very important that, you get around your SAT and you get that good score first, right? So before, you go into your SAT, before you start with your test, I have 5 predictions so that, you can go through them again and you can work on it, right? So these 5 predictions, I have these 5 types of questions that, normally the students, they neglect because they're not very common. But these, I am predicting that you guys will see these questions, or you guys may see these questions on the SAT this time. So just work hard and just make sure that you go through all of these concepts, right? Now, the first prediction that I have for you is words in context. Now, what's so special about words in context? Because normally we are very used to the questions that are about vocabulary. They are towards the start of the paper, and there is nothing new or there is nothing uncommon about, these questions. We are very accustomed to, expecting these questions on the SAT. But what's different over here is that I'm talking about a words in context that is a little different from the ones that, you guys expect on the paper. Now, normally the questions that we get, they have a blank towards any part of the, passage, and we have to, select the best word that can come in that blank, right? But, normally there are times where we get questions where there is a word written in the passage and, the examiner asks you for, a word that is in line with that particular word. So you don't have a blank, you have a word, and you are asked to find a synonym or a word that can fit in that particular context. And that is the best word for that particular context, right? So you have to find an alternative for a word that is already there. So this is a different kind of words in context question. It rarely comes, right? But I am predicting that you may see this question on the SAT. Now, for all the 5 predictions that I have, what I'll do is I'll walk you through all those questions, discuss a little bit about how you can solve them so that, it can be easy for you to, review them and, work out this strategy and practice a few more questions related to these questions, right? So that you may leverage, the score, because the goal is to get that improvement. The goal is to get to that 1500 or 1550 or that score that we have been dreaming of, right? So that is very important. So let's talk about the first prediction. It says the following text is from F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1925 novel, The Great Gatsby. Gatsby was balancing himself on the dashboard of his car with that resourcefulness of movement that is so peculiarly American, that comes, I suppose, with the absence of lifting work in youth, and more with the formless grace of our nervous sporadic games. This quality was continually breaking through his punctilious manner in the shape of restlessness. Now, let's go to the question. The question over here asks us, as used in the text, what does the word quality most nearly mean? So we are talking about the word quality, right? So it is we do not have a blank in the question. We have a word quality written already in the passage. It's written over here. And we have to find a word that can fit in. It has to be particularly a synonym. And if quality has been used in a different context over here in the passage, then we have to find a word that can fit into that particular context. That is very important about it, right? So if you look at it over here, it says, even more with the formless grace of our nervous sporadic games, this quality was continually breaking. So you're talking about an attribute. You're talking about an attribute, a quality. So the word that can fit in over here has to be somewhat around attribute, right? So if you look at the first option that you have, it is characteristic. So characteristic is perfectly in line with the word that we needed, attribute. And this is one of the things that you guys have to work on. Most of the students, what they do is they just read the questions and they jump onto the options, and that is why they normally get, or most of the times get, their words in context questions wrong, on which you should get a perfect score easily, even in both the modules, if you even have a basic decent vocabulary base, right? So what you should do is, when you read the passage and when you look for the word that that you want or that has to be the answer, first just try to work out the type of word that can be your answer, or at least the connotation of that word, whether it should be positive, negative, or neutral, whatever it can be. Once you work out that connotation, after that, you can go on to the options and test the choices and then eliminate the choice that is not in line with the word that you have worked out, right? So if you look at it, characteristic can perfectly be our answer, but still, because it talks about the word most nearly means, so we have to find the best word. So it is a possibility that we might have a better word. So we'll still look at the other options, because you can never ignore the other options. Just remember that. Even if you feel like you have your answer on the first option, just go through, make a habit of going through all the options in a quick glance. So if you look at option B, it says standard. So again, we know standard has nothing to do with attribute, characteristic, quality. It has nothing to do with that. It is something different. It is something that is a byproduct of it. So it is what follows. It is not in and of itself a quality or an attribute, right? Again, prestige is the similar thing as standard. It is what follows. It is not exactly a part of it, right? And again, if you look at option D, it says accomplishment. Again, accomplishment has nothing directly linked with quality or the word. So again, this won't be the answer as well. So the best answer over here has to be what? The best answer over here has to be option A, characteristic, right? So if we move on, the next prediction that I have for you guys is cross-text connections. Now, apparently you can look at it, it's a lengthy question. I think it's the lengthiest that you can get, because, for all the questions that we have, we normally get one passage for one question. That is a must, right? On the SAT, if you have 27 questions, you'll get 27 passages. But this cross-text connection is the only question type that will give you two passages for one question, right? So two passages for one question, that is only cross-text connection, and only cross-text connection can give you that. And because you normally have the quantity of these questions, this is relatively low. You may get maybe a couple of questions, or even at times one question in one module from these cross-text connections. Now, because these questions are a bit lengthy, the students tend to ignore it. They tend to, tend to not practice it. They do not, focus on these questions, because they're like, we can, work on other questions and get the score that we want from it. So what I want to tell you guys over here is that cross-text connection questions are actually one of the easiest form of questions that you can get, if only you can focus on what they're asking you to do, right? So it's very important for you to focus and understand what they're trying to do. There is nothing technical. There are many other question types that are much more harder than cross-text connection, but just because cross-text connection questions are a bit lengthy, students, they tend to not focus on it. So I want you guys to make sure that you work on the strategy of these questions and you take them with you on the exam day. And I am predicting that you may very well get questions that are related to cross-text connections, right? So let's go through one question so that we understand how to do this. So if you look at the first text, like I told you, you'll have two texts. So first text, it talks about public policy researcher Anthony Fowler studied the history of elections in Australia, a country that requires citizens to vote. Fowler argues that requiring citizens to vote lead to a significant increase in voters who would otherwise not have the time or motivation to vote. Thus, election results in countries that require citizens to vote better reflect the preferences of the country as a whole. So this is what we have to do. We have to work out the point of view or the conclusion of both the passages, right? And then we have to work on accordingly as per the question. So if you look at the point of view or the conclusion of this passage, text 1, it says that if you require citizens to vote, what it would do, it would, better reflect the preferences of the country as a whole. This is what it is saying. And then if you look at text 2, if you read this, it says, governments in democratic countries function better when more people vote. However, forcing people to vote may have negative consequences. Shane P. Singh and Jason Roy studied what happens when a country requires its citizens to vote. They found that when people feel forced to vote, they tend to spend less time looking for information about their choices when voting. As a result, votes from these voters may not reflect their actual preferences. So this is completely in contradiction with the first passage. So the first passage is telling you that if you require people to vote, it will give you a fair representation of what's going on. But the second passage is saying that if you require people to vote, they would not spend time in looking for, who is a better candidate, and it will not reflect a better representation. In other words, the second passage is the opposite. The second passage is the opposite of the first passage, right? And in cross-text connection, normally this is what happens, right? So the two passages that you'll have, they will normally have similar topics, but, they will either, strengthen each other, agree with each other, disagree with each other, or modify each other. That is, what is going to happen. Over here, they are disagreeing with each other. Now we have to see what the question is asking us, right? So the question says, based on the text, how would Singh and Roy, the people who have written text 2, most likely respond to the research discussed in text 1, right? So obviously, if the people of text 2 would read text 1, they will disagree with it because they do not think what text 1 is offering is right. So they would disagree with it. So if you look at option A, it says only countries of certain population size should implement mandatory voting. So they are against the mandatory voting as a whole. So it does not depend whether a particular country size is opting for it, whether a particular population is opting for it. When they're against the entire idea, no matter who opts for it, that does not count, right? So option A cannot be your answer. If you look at option B, it says people who are forced to vote are likely to become politically engaged in other ways, such as volunteering, running for the office. Again, it is not mentioned in anywhere in any of the two passages. They are just disagreeing with each other. You need to find that. Requiring people to vote does not necessarily lead to election outcomes that better represent the preferences of the country as a whole. Obviously, they would say what their conclusion is. They would say what they feel like. So that is option C. So that is going to be your answer. If you look at option D, it says countries that require voting must make the process of voting easier for their citizens. So it's not about the difficulty of the process. It's about the type of the process and the result that it will come out, right? So again, this is not going to be your answer. So let's move on. So the first one was words in context. The second one was cross-text connection. And the third is the leading question. Now, this is a very subtle question, and it normally, comes in between maybe question number 9 and 10, where you're ending the craft and structure and transitioning to information and ideas. That's where, you see this question pop up. And this is, because it's not a part of those 11 famous types that, you normally have on the SAT. This is one of the questions that students do, normally they tend to ignore. But my prediction is that you will find these questions, at least a couple of them in both the modules combined. So this is an important question type for you. Let's read it, what it says. The following text is from Jane Austen's 1811 novel Sense and Sensibility. Eleanor lives with her younger sisters and her mother, Mrs. Dashwood. Eleanor is the eldest daughter whose advice was so effectual, possessed a strength of understanding and coolness of judgment which qualified her, though only 19, to be the counselor of her mother. So she was very intelligent. So although she was 19, but what she said made a lot of sense, and that is why she was counseling her mother. So that is, regardless of the age, she was very intelligent and enabled her frequently to counteract, to the advantage of them all, the eagerness of mind in Mrs. Dashwood, which generally have led to imprudence. She had an excellent heart, her disposition was affectionate, and her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn, and which one of her sisters has resolved never to be taught. So what we are talking about over here in this passage is the fact that Eleanor was very intelligent, and regardless of the age that she had, she was very mature because, she was counseling her mother, and, what she was saying was making a lot of sense. And that is why, all of these things are written over here. So if you look at the question now, it says, according to the text, what is true about Eleanor? So we have already worked out what's true about her. Let's, try to find it in the options. So if the first option, it says, Eleanor often argues with her mother but fails to change her mind. So we don't know whether she, was able to change her mind or was not. But, from the passage, we can get an idea because she was continually counseling her mother. We can assume that she was able to change her mind rather than, vice versa. So this is going to be the opposite. And even if not that, we just cannot, figure out this information from the passage. And that is, again, not the purpose. The result is not the purpose. What she was doing, that is what we have to find out, because the question is asking about what is true about Eleanor. It's not about what she did or what she accomplished, right? So Eleanor can be overly sensitive with regard to the family matters. She was not. She was actually the opposite, and that is why she was, able to maintain her calm and everything. If you look at option C, it says Eleanor thinks her mother is a bad role model. She was not a bad role model. It just talks about that her mother needed advice on a few things, right? And even if she was a bad role model, it's not telling her anything about what Eleanor was, right? So if you look at this, again, this cannot be your answer. And if you look at option D, it says Eleanor is remarkably mature for her age. This is something that we can easily talk about. Why? Because, we understand that Eleanor was only 19 years old, and in spite of that age, she was counseling her mother, who, must have been almost at least twice her age. So that has to be sorted out. So, this is what we can figure out from this passage, and that is why the best answer for this question will be option D. So you just have to focus on the information that has been asked in the question, and you'll get it easily in the passage. So, this is one of the questions that I am predicting that you will have or you may have on the SAT. So just make sure, if you have not talked about or you have not, studied this question or not, practiced the approach of this question, you do that before the test, right? So moving on to the fourth prediction. So the fourth prediction is the technical one, and it is the inference question. Now, the inference question, we should know for the inference question that we should have a premise for it and we should have a conclusion for it. So if we reach to the good or we reach to the right premise, automatically we'll get to the right conclusion as well. That is very, very, very important, right? Now, inference questions, they normally become very, they become a little, I wouldn't say hard, but yes, they become a little confusing because the answer that we need is not directly written in the passage, but we have enough information that, that can help us get to the answer. It's almost like, reverse understanding where, we have a part of it written. It's like every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So that means that if you do not have any action, you would have, no reaction. So that is how it goes out. That is how it works about. So, can easily, if you work out the premise, you can get to the conclusion of the passage. So, let's read one question and see how this works. It says, in their book, Smart Pricing, Jagmohan Raju Z and Z. John Zhang consider musicians' use of non-traditional pay-as-you-wish pricing model. The model generally offers listeners the choice to pay more or less than a suggested price for a song or album, even to pay nothing at all. As the authors note, that's the option most listeners choose for an album by band 𝐷𝐴𝐴. Only about 1% opted to pay for the album, resulted in earnings below the band's expectations. But the authors also discuss musicians 𝗵𝐶𝘄𝐵𝐶, who saw significant earnings from her pay-as-you-wish online music store as a result of many listeners choosing to pay more than the store's suggested prices. Hence, the pay-as-you-wish model may. So from the passage, we can get an idea of the fact that this pay-as-you-wish model is good, is resulting in good payments for some and, not so good payments for others. That's the only information that we're getting, because the band was not able to get enough revenue and the singer 𝗵𝐶𝘄𝐵𝐶 was able to get that revenue. That is the only information that we are getting out of it, right? So if you look at the question, it says which choice most logically completes the text. So we just have to have an answer that talks about that it's good for some and it's not good for others. That is what it means, right? So if you look at option A, it says prove financially successful for some musicians but disappointing for others. This is exactly what has happened. It has been successful for 𝗵𝐶𝘄𝐵𝐶, but it has not been that successful for the other band, right? So the best answer over here can be option A, but we'll again look for the other options as well. If you look at option B, it says hold greater financial appeal for bands than for individual musicians. So this is exactly the opposite of what's going on, right? So it is actually the band who was not able to make the money. So again, this is opposite, irrelevant, won't be the answer. Cause most musicians who use the model to lower the suggested prices of their songs and albums over time. Again, even if they did, we do not have any such information in the passage. We do not have any such information. If we do this, if we go for this, this is going to be a mere assumption, and we cannot go for assumptions. We have to infer. We do not have to assume in these questions, right? So look at option D. It says more strongly reflect differences in certain musicians' popularity than traditional pricing models do. Now, this is a very confusing part. Why? Because students may assume that because the second singer or the singer 𝗵𝐶𝘄𝐵𝐶, because the singer was able to accumulate more revenue, there is a possibility that he was more popular. But again, it's not about popularity. It's about the cash or the revenue or the money or the payments that they were able to receive. So we have to stay limited to what is there in the passage, right? Especially when we have an option that talks about financial success, right? If we did not have any option about financial success, then maybe you would have gone for option D, assuming that because of popularity, they were able to, get more payment. So because we have an option that talks about financial success, you're not going to take option D as the answer, and option A is going to be the answer, although it clearly does not suggest in the passage that this was the case, but that is how the questions related to inference are built up, and that is why the best answer for this question will be option A. Now let's move on to my last prediction. Now my last prediction is from Standard English Conventions, boundaries part. Now we have, you guys must have learned so many concepts. We have so many concepts in Standard English Conventions, and I hope you guys, are doing it. We have subject of agreement, we have modifiers, plurals and possessive, pronouns, so many things. Even when it comes to boundaries, there are so many things: coordination, subordination, semicolons, colons. There are so many things that we have to learn about. But this question is very special, and it's a little different as well. That is why I picked this question up, and I strongly feel that you might have this question, especially in the upcoming October SAT 2024. So what is this question about? This one concept that you have to understand, that if there is a subject and you have a verb right after it, or in other words, you only use punctuations when they are needed. This is just one thing that you should write down, that unnecessary punctuations should always be avoided. And I'm using the word punctuations on purpose because I'm talking about all of them. Whether it's a dash, whether it's a colon, whether it's a semicolon, whether it's a comma, whether it's any other punctuation mark, all of them have a particular usage, right? And if that particular usage is not being applied, and if they're not needed, right, you don't need to use any of those punctuation marks. Now, this is one of a clear example of what I'm talking about. So you have a subject, right? And you have a verb immediately written after it, right? So if you look at this, it says, generations of mystery and horror blank have been influenced by the dark Gothic stories of celebrated American author Edgar Allan Poe, 1849. So again, the question is similar, which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English. Now, writers. Generations of mystery and horror writers have been influenced. So writers or mystery and horror writers, and you're talking about what? You're talking about the subject again is what? Generations, because you have whatever is written before the preposition normally tends to become the subject of the sentence. So you have the subject written over here, and immediately after the subject you have this verb. So you do not use any punctuation mark, when you have the subject and verb written all together, right? So if you use a comma, that would mean it becomes in a positive, and it would be incorrect because the verb is for the subject. If the verb were written for something else, then we might have gone for it. Again, dash would mean it is describing something where the verb is written for the subject. And exactly this is why we wouldn't be using semicolon, because semicolons are normally used when you're joining to independent sentences. And this is nowhere near an independent sentence, right? It's only the subject, the name of the subject. So again, all of these three options will be incorrect. But normally the questions that we get on boundaries is where we are focusing on which type of punctuation has to be used, and you select the best punctuation as per the need of the hour or need of the question. These questions are very rare where you do not need a punctuation in the sentence. So you have to be very careful about the fact what is the condition where you do not need a punctuation, and act accordingly, right? So these were my 5 predictions, guys, for the SNT. I hope you guys are working really hard. I want you guys to keep working, and this is the moment where you have to push harder for those extra points. And if you keep working hard, hopefully you will get that score, you will get that improvement that you're looking for. All the best from my side. If you have any question, you can comment, and you can, it would be really nice if you guys can subscribe and like our channel. And I hope to see you guys in the upcoming videos. Thank you so much. This was Talal Hussain.